Okay. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of Integro and Tech Data and IBM, welcome to the second of our webinar series. Today, we're going to be covering optimizing your threat intelligence capability using AI and other strategic tools within the IBM portfolio. I'm joined by Courtney Octor from Integro. This is Jim Skidmore from Integro. And we're also joined by our subject matter expert from Tech Data, Frank Welder. So today we're going to take you through some very meaningful content. We have some access to the cyber range to kind of validate some of the concepts that we'll be bringing forward. And that being said, let's kick things off. So I'd like to introduce Frank Welder to kind of get the ball rolling.
Hey, good morning, Jim. I really appreciate that as well. So usually, you know me, I'm always cam on all the time, right? Well, today, I live and work out of my RV. Well, this week I decided to go someplace where it was a little nicer, better views and things like that. And I'm a tad bit bandwidth constrained. So with the video going on, plus the presentation, plus remote access into the cyber range, I've decided I'm going to give everybody a break today and turn the mug off. So there you go. I think that's a win for everybody, Tim.
Okay.
I think it is. So I'm going to just go into some screen sharing right now, and hopefully somebody can tell me that they're seeing this up on the screen. So good. I'm going to hit the presentation mode here, and we're going to jump into this thing, and away we go. Oh goodness, I've got doing some dirty laundry here and moving stuff around all over the place. There we go. That's what we're talking about here. Right. So this is the start of the presentation we had on the last time we were together, talking about fundamental security and things like this, right? And if you remember, we kind of started off with the numbers like this, right? And it goes with because our security teams are working their tails off on trying to make and manage and make sure the bad guys don't win, at least don't win that first time, right? Keeping out the ransomware and making sure the good guys are getting in and the bad guys aren't, and things like that, right? So we're going to continue that discussion today, but I'm going to just go over as a review just a couple of things we talked about last time. And part of that is I will need to go and find ourselves. We're going to go to slide 22. I think that's where we're at here. Yeah, slide 22. Let me get to that one real quick. Just as a review, it said last time we were talking about I needed to be able to have a thing that sees everything, right? We talked about the three pillars of effective threat detection for an organization. We wanted to talk about that we had to have this thing that sees everything associated with it, right? And we talked about that stuff last week, right? How that was going to be, QRadar is an offering in this space. It lets you see all that stuff, right? That complete visibility for endpoints and activity and wrong button there, right? Endpoints and data activity and network users and configuration information. I want to be able to see all of that stuff. And then when I see all of that stuff, I want to be able to correlate it and normalize it, and then run queries against my my security environment, right? The rules against my security environment. Say, if you violate my security, if you violate my rules, if you violate my security policies, I'm going to then throw an offense. We investigated some offenses last week. Well, one of the things that we talked about as a pillar for effective threat detection is this automation of intelligence. And we're going to talk about two things that are in the automation of intelligence section today. All right, so for that, we're going to slide on over to slide, we're going to go to slide 50, right? So we're going to move on down here. I'm sorry, slide 34. And so when we talked about those two things, we're going to talk about that really use some automation with inside your environment. first, and we're going to talk about these two pillars. There's actually three that IBM has, and the third one is IBM's I2. But I got to tell you what, usually we only talk about I2 if you're like a defense thing. You got three-letter initials and things like that. Then we use we talk about I2 a lot as part of that. But for 95% or 90% of our customers that are using the QRadar platform, right? If I want to do some automation of intelligence associated with that, I'm going to use two offerings. And one of those offerings is a no-charge offering, an at no charge, right? Because we're already going to get your money on the QRadar side, is this thing called QRadar User Behavior Analytics, or UBA, right? I know we talk about that quite a bit within the market space, and other offerings are out there as well, right? But UBA is all about being able to help organizations detect insider threats with machine learning, right? That's the automation we're talking about in this case, right? We're going to talk about some of that machine learning and things like that, and why. We're going to talk about insider threats associated with this, right? Shouldn't we talk about outsider threats? We're going to talk about why, the number of threats, things like that, right? And then the other one we're going to finish up today talking about is then just spending a couple minutes with this thing called QRadar Advisor with Watson. And this really is a supercharged artificial intelligence that goes out there and says, let me help you with these types of things. So let's get started with user behavior analytics, right? So the first thing we talked about is I'm going to use UBA as an offering to detect insider threats. Now that doesn't mean that the problem is going to be your insiders, the people inside your organization, but here's what the cybersecurity community has told us. Insiders are responsible for more than 50% of data breaches, according to Forrester in 2017. That continues on, right? 74% named user intervention, clicking a link, right? So whether you know it or not, clicking a link in that email that downloads malware and all that other good stuff, that's an insider threat, right? Because that 90% of organizations feel very vulnerable to this insider threat pieces, right? So the insider threats are a big portion of this. Now let's take a look at the motivation. Usually, the majority of it is accidental or unintentional insider threats, right? They're just plowing through email and they're clicking and clicking and clicking, and all of a sudden they get that one that looks like it should be the thing, and they click on it, and boom, they've infected themselves, right? So that's the inconsequential one associated with that, right? Versus the very malicious or deliberate user, right? So those are the ones that said, oh, look, I have access. Well, I'm going to continue on driving through this piece of access. Well, I've got access into a database that I didn't know I had, or a file share that I didn't have, right? So I'm now going to be deliberate associated with that and see what I can find associated with that. Still not being malicious, maybe, but there it is, right? And so, but there's an organizational cost to this as well. Our most vulnerable data, right, confidential business info and things like that, is the stuff that's getting accessed. And the average cost is between $100,000 and $500,000 per successful insider attack associated with that. So that's why we start talking about, half of your threats are coming from inside your organization. Let's make sure we understand how we look at those threats inside the organization. Here's the spectrum of threats that we get associated with this, right? Now, don't want to sound like I'm the Treasury agent, Secret Service guy talk about the lone wolves, right? But there are, some cases in larger organizations, lone wolves that are going out there and they're trying to find stuff associated with it. The majority of them fall into the goof or the pawn one, right? You said that right there, right? 90% of insider incidents are caused by goofs, right? And that's just ignorance, right? And I don't mean ignorance in a bad way here. It's just ignorance is that I didn't know that link would take me that, or I didn't know that was the function that when I pressed that button associated with it, right? So there's that active ignorance. There's also the folks that, even from a goof standpoint, they're bypassing security controls, right? And that's kind of an issue that IT and IT security should have, right? Is if that's supposed to have a security control on there, why doesn't it? So we can help make our users not turn into goofs in there, shall we say, right? And so between the lone wolves and the collaborators, right, versus the goofs and the pawns, these kinds of threats that we see with inside our organization, but they're all trying to get access, followed by abuse associated with it, right? Whether they know it or not, That's what they're really trying to get at associated with that. So there are many unknowns in pre and post achieving access, right? So if I'm a bad guy, there's a couple of steps that I take a look at associated with this. And we see this in the MITRE ATT&CK framework as well, if you're familiar with the MITRE ATT&CK framework. One of those things is gaining access, and then there is the thing that says is defending your access associated with that, right? So when we think about from a security analyst, right, low, high, and low associated with it, right? Gaining access, achieving access, and abusing access is all part of the steps that we see users trying to, or excuse me, the bad guys trying to do when trying to get access to it. So in that gaining access piece, goofs and pawns, right? That's usually social engineering or evasion techniques, right? That's that email that comes through from your favorite delicatessen offering a discount associated with it, or an email from a trusted advisor outside your organization that has a link to it that they didn't even know got put in there, right? So, those are the pieces we typically see from a gaining access. And then abusing access is when we get data skimming or data obfuscation, right? So that is, once the bad guys gain access to it, they'll then start using techniques like keyboard readers and screen readers to actually then do data skimming on databases or some of your secure access sites, and then just being able to then try to figure out a way to filtrate that within inside the organization. Right, so there are pretty defined frameworks that we see, and again, like I said, the MITRE framework is one of those frameworks that helps us understand that gain, achieving, and abusing access, and where those pieces sit in. Right, so we have to understand, right, from how the bad guys are going to then start using your environment. What things that you as an organization can do to thwart them in that piece, right? So when we start tying this thing together, right, we can start tying together some security analytics associated with this that says, you know what, I'm first going to have to, let's say, instrument and classify my user activity. And this is where UBA, user behavior analytics, really comes in, right? Is I'm going to, since I can see everything, right? I can see events and network activity and user logins and accessing information, right? When I can first get that piece of the information, I can then instrument and classify this type of user activity, right? And we'll start looking at some of the classification of that user activity inside of the UBA environment, because it really helps us understand, okay, well, now I can start seeing where some of this stuff is happening. And I'll do that via rules and regular expressions and things like that, as well as some threat intelligence, right? So threat intelligence would tell me what indicators of compromise or how this is being used in my environment, or could be used in my environment, to tie those together. So that's step one, right? We want to make sure that, we'll step A1 is actually, getting a system that can see everything. But then the next step is instrument and classify that user activity, right? In our environment, we've got it all there, right? So now I've got my step one. I'm classifying my user activity, right? Now I want to be able to understand some behavioral monitoring, right? So Frank Welder comes in, he's a good employee, always logs in by 8:15. Right, checks his this, and working associated with this, usually logs out at 5:15, and we never have him log in on weekends or things like that, right? Versus Del Belkin, who is a remote user, he's all over the place, and he VPNs, and it's changing geographies, right? All of that behavioral and machine learning pieces is to help predict and understand what that normal is associated with that. So then I can say, you know what, over the last month time frame, right, this has been the normal usage patterns of this user or groups of users associated with that. And as long as I don't see anything outside of that, then I won't throw any flags, or that won't become an issue or a problem associated with that, right? So that's step two, is predicting and using and understanding that normal for what your user community is, right? And then lastly, right, the step three is I want to compare that actual user against the normal associated with that, because that's where I find out, well, there's some differences, right? And I'm going to score them, right? So one of the things we start talking about continually as part of this thing is this activity equals, if I got an activity here like user Del Belkin, right? Del's that the wild guy who's always remote, right? He changes geographies. So one week he's in the United States, the next week he's in Latin America, and the third week he's in Europe, right? Well, those activity actually increases his risk score, right? Because he's going through airports and different environments and hotels and things like that. So that whole, even though we know he's using VPN, he's changing geographies associated, that's going to add to or change the risk score. And doesn't mean it's doing anything bad. It's just going to be able to monitor that, and then that'll become part of Dell's new normal associated with that, right? So that whole third step is to be that comparing that actual versus the normal associated with that. And then we also want to tie in some cognitive reasoning on the top side associated with that, which is really understanding the state and risk of an ongoing attack, right? Am I having an attack? How is this attack being affected in my user community? And is that changing some of the risks associated with that? And I'll say we include that as part of this because when we see a something like an escalation of privileges, right? So if we think about a ransomware leading to a malware leading to a taking over of credentials and then accessing organizations, right? That's usually is somebody installed a keyboard reader as part of that malware that got downloaded. And then that keyboard reader was waiting for any time that user logged in, and then they started investigating all the different users, and finally somebody with administrative privileges logged in, and they started using that to then access data that they shouldn't be accessing and trying to exfiltrate, right? We have to be able to understand how these attacks work, and that's where that cognitive reasoning comes in to be able to take that into place. So let's take a look at how QRadar's user behavior analytics, or UBA, takes place as part of this. We're going to start at the bottom of this one, right? So platform and intelligence base, right? So it's going to leverage the power of the QRadar intelligence platform, right? Again, that whole see everything, and it's easy to deploy right from the IBM App Exchange, right? So it's an no charge add-on associated with that. But let's not confuse easy to deploy with easy to use sometimes, right? Because there's going to be some tuning associated with that. We're going to show you some of that tuning as well, right? And then the middle one up is I want to be able to integrate user and enterprise visibility. So remember, we talked about I need to be able to see everything, logs and flows, right? So I'm going to be able to go out there and I'm going to take, if I've got existing alerts and offenses, I'm going to enrich them with user activity insights, right? So it says, hey, this alert of this offense we got over here, this is actually tied to Frank Welder, all right, or Dell Belkin, or whatever user associated with this, right? So now I'm tying event and alert data with user data, right? And now I'm going to then allow me to investigate drillable user activity views and then integrate with security operations workflow, right? Does that need to be investigated? Does that need to be shut down? Is there some remediation we need to be able to do with that thing, right? And then it all ties into, at the top level, this is what we see, right, is the surface unknowns associated with this, right? Our whole goal is discover and predict normal activity using machine learning, right? That's what we're going to do. I want to be able to detect advanced analytics and behavioral monitoring, right? So as well as I need to be able to instrument my user risks and historical activities together, right? So that's what we start when we package all those things together. That's what we get for UBA. So let's take a look at some of the use cases associated with UBA, right? So insider threat detection, right? So the driver associated with that is advanced and targeted attacks and incident investigation, right? So we want to be able to do those types of things. The user who's going to be doing that type of insider threat detection is going to be the threat management, or the SOC, or the incident response team. The SOC, the Security Operations Center, or the incident response team is going to be the folks using that type of thing, right? And the QRadar capabilities that get used there is alerts enriched by with behavior insight. So looks like the user was doing something here. Detect high risk activity, right? High risk activity, not using a VPN from a different geography from a compromised host, right? And then locate those moments of activity, right? So very quickly say, here's when that happened. Here's that timeline, the big time, and here's when it happened. And the benefits we really see for this one is to surface and to stop that insider threat, right? Because insider threats are hard to visualize sometimes, because it's our own users being able to take advantage of it. We know something happened, but where and when and why did it happen? And then understand that user activity. And this really ties into this thing called a signature-less detection, right? So sometimes these the user threats we get from insider is sometimes there's not a signature, an attack signature or a file signature that says this is the bad guy, right? Or an IP address, this is the bad guy, right? So this helps us understand and get access to those signature-less, right? Because even though that user has access, it's out of the norm for that user to be able to access it, and they've never downloaded and sent that information somewhere else, right? So that's what we see associated with this, right? And then the whole user risk visibility. If you're a large contractor organization, or you've got a lot of folks that have bypassed privileged access management and use of shared accounts, this is a really good one to be able to say which users are doing what, or which shared accounts are doing what associated with that. So you might be able to address that with something like Secret Server or something else, be able to stop that piece of it. But a different user for that's a risk officer or the lead risk and compliance architect, right? And this is just risk reports associated. So that's the use case we're going to be looking at today is going to be insider threat detection for our demo as part of our event today. All right, so let's take a look at some of the the QRadar UBA components, because I think this is going to be an interesting piece, because right after this slide, we're going to jump into the demo and show off some of the screens and look at what that looks like. But I want to take us through this first couple of things, right? So I've got this whole thing underneath it, powered by QRadar, right? And all of my logs and data sources are coming in and it's seeing that, right? So the data integrations are happening, auto-discovered, updated, supported, right? Inside of my UBA environment, I've got this thing that says I want to be able to track. Remember, we want to be able to instrument and categorize associated with this. So here's a listing of the categories that UBA is going to put all of this log and data source information into. It's going to say, is that a browsing behavior? Is that accounts? Is that access? Was that reconnaissance? Is that data exfiltration, right? So it's going to be able to put it into these categories for us to be able to understand. And then the next part that says, okay, I've got my data, I've categorized it, is now I'm going to do the machine learning and risk scoring, right? So this is going to be user activity. Do I see deviation, variation, or similarity associated with it? Is this Frank Walder's peer group do the same type of work associated with it? And the thing we really like associated with this is very tunable machine learning algorithm. So it's not set on what IBM thinks it should be, or whoever the forester or the analyst is, right? This is tunable machine learning algorithms that you go out there and say, I want to look at it this way or this way, right? And then output to analyst, right? So then I get all of the stuff come together in a dashboard that an analyst can take a look at, right? And I can view it by user role, title, session. I can create watch lists and reference sets associated with this, right? So now this is where I get all of my UBA components to come into play for me. So let's take a look at my QRadar environment running in my cyber range in Arizona. And so in my QRadar environment, I've got up and running, and as you can see, and I've got a tab called User Analytics associated with this. So surprise, surprise, right? So when I click on my User Analytics tab, it comes up with the tab you would have seen, right? This is that analyst view that takes all of that the component pieces and puts it into one space associated with this. And I can very quickly see that I have some users, right? So I can look at the rules that are being monitored and what machine learning is happening, where my users were imported and how they were discovered. But the rubber meets the road over here in the monitored users section associated with this, right? So I can tell that I've got a user that has got an increasing risk score associated with it, and it has turned it from gray, which is just kind of standard. Oh, that's there's normal deviation or normal usage associated with it, to red, right? That says something's going on with this user and has been happening very quickly associated with this, right? So that's my monitored users, and very quickly I can go in and I can click on Jonah Black, and I can have Jonah Black's information pulled in, as well as what type of suspicious activity. If there was any recent offenses, when we talked about enrichment of offenses associated with it. So I can see that 3 minutes ago, this user had an offense associated with it, with multiple login failures for the same user, preceded by login failures, preceded by success from the same thing, right? So that tells me that might have been a brute force attack on a user ID, right? Trying to get access to this. That happened just 3 minutes ago associated with that, right? So that's that enrichment of information that I get, that I now can say that, okay, I had an offense over there on the offense screen, but now I'm tying this to a user. And look, there's some other things that has been happening as part of this user as well, right? So I can, again, just see all the different recent offenses that this user has been tied to. And that's one of the reasons why the suspicious activity scale has gone up associated with it, right? So it learned 118 different things and then put it into this place, right? So I can graph that thing out. As well as, remember we talked about that, I want to see it in that when it happened, in the moment in time associated with that. So I know all of that stuff happened here on July 28th, right? So today, and I click on this thing and look, it'll now show me how many different use cases have been violated associated with this. So I can tell that this user had a PowerShell malicious usage detected from an encoded command. I, as a SOC analyst, immediately know that that somebody's using Metasploit trying to get access into this account. Most likely have succeeded associated with that. So this is where it adds to all of the different use case information, and this is why it added to the scores. It said Tone of Black gets a 50 for this and 100 for this, and now all of a sudden my rating for this particular user is in the 500s associated with that, right? So this is the reason why all of those things are looking at. And again, I can click onto any one of these, and it'll show in a log activity all the supporting activity associated with this. So I can do threat hunting associated with this as well. Look, I got some process creations associated with this. I really need to take a look at that, right? Or I can say, hey, somebody added a hidden network share. So that tells me somebody's getting ready to try to exfiltrate or view some data and exfiltrate it within inside the organization. So the point we're trying to make associated with this is tying together event and flow information with user information really makes it easy to be able to look at a particular user and say, this is where I'm having my problem at, right? I need to do something associated with that inside my environment. So now I can then, I can start doing things, right? I'm going to start taking actions associated with this, or I can start saying something's going wrong, and what do I need to be able to do associated with this, right? So I'm going to go back to the dashboard so I can show this thing off. I want to show some of the things we took a look at, right? So one of the things that I usually get asked as part of this type of discussion is, well, what does this thing mean over here, right? So I've got a different type of alarm, right? So this one is a user recently applied for a job with HP, right? So we want to know that type of thing. So one of the things we take associated with that is the UBA settings. So in my UBA settings, here's where we start saying how I want to be able to take my applications and generate my users and what my date ranges I want to be able to use for my activities and intervals and dormants and things like that. And so this is one way that I get to be able to modify my UBA settings right from that site associated with this, as well as if I want to be able to do my rules and tuning associated with this. And tuning is where we get to have all the fun, if there is such a thing as fun, associated with user behavior analytics. So remember we started talking about the different categories of stuff that I wanted to be able to monitor. Well, I know that I've got, I'm gonna choose the category of browsing behavior. And I know inside of the browsing behavior, I've got 18 different things that I'm going to be monitoring. So I can monitor browse to a business site or communications or education, entertainment, gambling, government, IT, lifestyle, as well as I think we've got gambling, malicious, phishing website, porn, religious, social networking, risky URL, right? So I can assign, so I can say, if any of my users browse to any of these sites, I'm going to add to the risk score associated with that, right? So this is where I do that. I add or minus. So I can say, actually, I'm going to move them to a 20 if they go to a phishing, or 25 if they're going to a phishing website. So this is how I can start tuning my environment. So this is what we showed for just browsing behavior. I can show that for accessing clouds, right? So if I access an AWS cloud by root activity, right, this is where I'm going to be doing it at. I can show this under regular access and authentication, right? If I'm doing this is the first time they've ever accessed critical assets or using a VPN, right? So there's lots of settings that I can tune for my UBA environment to help with managing my users in my environment. So these categories really help me understand what I'm going to be monitoring and putting into place, as well as how I can change those monitors or change those within inside my organization. So I love being able to show that one off because it really does show a consistent way of being able to instrument and then categorize your users, right? So we take all of that great information we're getting and we even mine it for more information to make it useful for our users, the folks that are using our systems, right? So that's one of the reasons why we think when we start talking about user behavior analytics, that it really ties into threat hunting more than anything else, because it really does pull all those things together and give you a single view associated with it. Now, I rarely give the competitive view associated with this, but this was a pretty big deal when IBM announced this, that they were going to deliver user behavior analytics, UBA, at no additional cost. Yes, you heard it there. IBM did something that just shocked me, right? They delivered an offering to the marketplace at no additional charge. So user behavior analytics is delivered out as a no-charge attribute as part of the IBM Security App Exchange, and download and install, and away you go, right? So I wanted to bring that out as part of the discussion as well. So that's the discussion we have with user behavior analytics, and why we think it really helps organizations figure out that Jonah Black, which is a dormant user, has been logged in and has escalation of privileges and is now trying to exfiltrate data, right? That, as a SOC analyst, that's what all of this information is telling me about user Jonah Black, right? Dormant account, and it's with admin controls, right? So that's what that was trying to tell me associated with that. So I'm going to go back now and I want to talk about the second piece of what we were going to discuss as part of our chat today, and that was along the lines of, when I send the presentation out, it's got all of the screenshots associated with it as well. So now I'm going to do from this slide, and we're going to talk about user behavior analytics. Curator Advisor with Watson, right? So Curator Advisor with Watson is a chargeable add-on available from the IBM App Exchange that really goes after being able to help our SOC analysts, our folks that have to do the investigation, reduce this thing called dwell time, right? How long does it take to find pieces of information and pull them in so that I can understand what's happening, as well as being then, since I can decrease the amount of time that you have to do on research associated with it, I'm going to also then increase your analyst efficiencies associated with it. I'm going to help you buy time so that your security analysts have information at their fingertips to be able to understand what was happening in their environment. So Curator Advisor with Watson is really, again, just built upon the Curator platform. And the advisor portion, right, performs local data mining, right? So it says, hey, if you had an offense that got created, I'm going to use Curator Advisor with Watson. I'm going to perform local mining and learning using observables to gather context, right? So I'm going to gather up that information and put that into its space, right? I'm going to see if I can't turn on my laser pointer, because gosh knows I love that, right? So I got my Watson advisor doing that, and then it sends it up to Watson for cybersecurity. So we couldn't possibly put all of that information on each individual installation, right? So this is where, using API calls, it's going to send that information it finds locally and sends it up to Curator in the sky, or Watson in the sky. And Watson in the Sky is this thing that reads more blog articles and indicators of compromise and threat feeds and stuff like that than anything else in the world, right? It just gobbles it all up, and then it understands the text associated with that, and it can apply meaning associated with that, right? And then then after it's chewed on the observables, it'll then send back to the end user via that API call and says, here's your actionable feedback, right? We found these observables, and these observables mean this, and we think it means this, and this is what we think you should do about it, right? And I think that's where we talk about decreasing dwell time and increasing efficiency. This is what helps right there. Imagine having to spend 4 hours reading blog posts and articles and searching and Googling the living daylights out of stuff. Whereas QRadar Advisor with Watson will give it to you in about 35 seconds, right? That's what we're talking about. Let's get the information available, and then increase the efficiencies with the responses and things like that. Right, so here's how it works, right? The big thing up in the sky. Every 5 minutes, structured data security, right? So it's going to take billions of data elements and put it all together, right? It's going to understand all of those things. So it's going to update that structured data piece, right? Every hour, it's going to do a crawl of critical unstructured security data, right? Blog, web post, news, malicious outbreak things, right? It's going to crawl each one of those and get those updates, right? Then every 1 to 3 days, it's going to do a massive crawl. I mean, in depth, right? Let me do a discussion of this thing, right? The millions of documents without them read. I mean, I think I'm a pretty good security analyst. I might read 3 or 5 documents a day. This thing reads millions of them and makes it known, right? And then it does this whole filtering and machine learning and removes unnecessary information, and then does machine learning and natural language processing, right? So I can say, I found these observables at this IP address at this time with this a file tag, right? A file hash, right? Boom, right? So now it then builds the security graph associated with that. And so now it comes out that says, okay, here it works, right? So here's the response that QRadar sends, or QRadar Advisor sends back, and it says, you know what? Here's my confidence level for this threat, right? I believe this is a medium or a high or whatever it is threat associated with it. It's also then going to let you visualize how the attack has occurred and is progressing right now, right? And that visualization, that can be a huge key in being able to figure out what's happening, as well as then here's the actionable insights associated, right? Here's all the observables, and here's all the actionable insights. Here, uncover what tactics can still possibly occur, and how you could be able to remediate or stop them dead in its tracks associated with that, right? And so here's the visualization piece, right? So cross investigation. So here's the interesting thing, and we see this with UBA quite a bit as well, right? We can see that the visualization is part of it, but guess what? It says, hey, this is also attached to another investigation that we're going as well. So that's why we think so. So now Watson said, hey, I think this attack that we're looking at, this incident we're looking at, is also tied to this incident we're looking at over here. And so they're the same thing, and then Watson's going to put them together and show them to you as part of the visualization associated with this. And where that really is going to drive is duplication of effort, right? Remember, right, I may not have enough SOC or incident response specialists to begin with, and so I don't want them to be out there, looking at the same type thing and coming to the same conclusion, right? I'm going to let the machine tell me that it's got that piece already done, right? So this is how we think that the whole analyst feedback, right? So the first line analyst, right, triage, gather info, and escalate, right? So they move it up, and they escalate it up. The tier 2 analysts really do the in-depth investigation, incident response, right? And so this is Advisor learns those investigations and escalates those together as well, right? So this is where, right, the Advisor says deprioritize this one and escalate this one, because priority is going to be important as part of what we're doing with our QRadar environment, with our Advisor environment. And so from a user interface and navigation, right, I can then view my QRadar environment. I can go to the QRadar, it's not the QRadar, my Watson tab, and get a view of all of my active investigations, as well as I can get a view of all my investigations as part of each offense that I'm taking a look at. Right, so again, this helps with the visualizations and where to start and which ones have a priority and different things associated with that. So now we're going to get out of this, and we're going to go punch some buttons on, nope, that's not what we're going to do. escape button. There we go. And we're going to take that down and go into this one. And let's go full screen on this, right? And so we talked about that I can view my Watson investigations by just clicking on the Watson tab, and it'll tell me by how many investigations I'm currently running, when they were investigated, and things like that. So I can click on this offense 175, and here's where I can actually see that visualization, right? So here are all the observables that QRadar found in my environment and sent it up into the Watson environment, and it then provides my feedback that says, hey, look, here's what it looks like, right? And then here's how it tied into some MITRE ATT&CK pieces, right? So we think it was high in this area and different things, as well as then some insights and offense summary, right? That says, here's the observables, the reasoning process found any additional pieces. So this one said, basically that you've got to log in, this particular piece is you've got the potential web vulnerability and somebody is trying to exfiltrate data associated with that, right? So this lets me just do a very quick view of being able to see that, as well as let's see if the graph relationship, and then here is the relationship, right? The visualization of that particular offense associated with that. So that's one way that I can view my offenses, is through the Watson tab associated with that. The other way I can view my offenses is I can go into this offense tab, and I can say, remember we talked about that was offense 175, so I can just double click offense 175. And I will have, hopefully, if Murphy and everything works correctly, I'll be able to see it in this summary view as well. So I can now view my Watson information in several different areas, depending on how I want to be able to use that information associated with it, right? So I can have it pop into this one, or I can use it that one. It'll also show up in my user analytics piece. If I go look at the offenses associated with that one as well, right? So I can view information about my Watson Advisor pieces in multiple areas as well, right? And if it hasn't been investigated, I can click that investigate button associated with it. So my goal today was to really talk about the two major ways that IBM's QRadar platform uses offense and investigation techniques to be able to investigate offenses. First was the capability to be able to look at offenses and be able to dissect them by the user behavior analytics interface, right? So that's the no charge option to really attack and being able to get a view of your outside threats to your organization, or excuse me, your insider threats inside your organization, as well as then using Watson as part of that enrichment process to be able to show for all the other investigations and helping your teams be able to increase efficiencies by not having to look up stuff that should be available via artificial or automated or augmented intelligence. So I hope you enjoyed your time with us today. Our next session is going to be talking about how we tie all of this together. And now that we've found our stuff, right? In fact, we found our violations. How do we respond to those violations? So that's what we're going to talk about on our next webinar, and that's not on June 10th. Jim, what day is that webinar again?
I was gonna cover that in a couple of quick notes I was going to provide right now, Frank.
Yep. So I will find the stop sharing button.
Okay.
I think it's here somewhere. Oh, there it is. There's my stop sharing button. So you should be able to share back and land this bird for us.
Sure, absolutely. All right. We do appreciate everybody's sticking with us today. So basically, just for 2 seconds and to kind of pay the bills, if you will, just to remind everybody who Integro is and what we do integrate AI and user behavior analytics focused solutions like Frank was just talking about with Watson and QRadar and obviously many other players and strategic solutions in the market. We are an organization involved solely in security, compliance, and risk management technologies, managed security services, IAM, identity and access governance, risk and compliance, which is huge, managed infrastructure services, and consulting. We are a diverse supplier, and we are well known for our competency and value to our customers. So where those two intersect is really where our focus is and how we measure ourselves. For attending today, we have a couple of free goodies, and I'll show you. One of them is oftentimes one we do as a project. But if there are specific technologies that you're looking at, and that can be anything, right? That can be endpoint, SOAR, SIM, server, cloud, network, any related security issue, or even in the SOC, right? We can help to review and provide a second opinion on some of the components that you're looking at, even if it helps to look at topology and to help people make an assessment based on the principal architects and engineers that we have to help you kind of along those lines. So that's a free discussion, doesn't cost anything to engage with us. Additionally, what we've been doing a lot of are free business value assessments. And what that helps people to do is to look at cost base and assets to make sure that they're all being utilized extremely effectively. And at times these days, people may even have assets that are, they're not necessarily even using, or there may be ways to optimize those to add value to the organization. That is not a pitch to sell something specific. It's merely a value-added kind of assessment to help you hopefully work harder and smarter. So that's just for attending today, and we do appreciate it. We'll be in touch for this. Again, the areas that we work in are focused around planning, consulting, integration, and compliance. So from endpoint to server, as I mentioned, SIM, SOAR, DLP, network zone strategy, forensic investigations, application security. I did mention we do those assessments, and that as an attendee, you are, again, we invite you to take us up on the capability to do that. We do work with converged identity and access management customers now, and privileged account and access management, especially as people are bringing their distributed environments together with the cloud in a hybrid model. We do lots of that. SOC operations, IR, red, blue, purple team integration and consulting we do a lot of as well, along with all types of threat, IoT, pen testing, full lifecycle compliance remediation, etc. So let's see. Well, for some reason, I'm not advancing. I'm not sure why that is. Okay. So, yeah, I was just going to basically take you to our next, we're basically have the third leg of our events coming up in August, on August 27th. So we would invite anybody to come back and stay as part of this series, as we're basically covering most aspects of security posture, policy, and best practices for the life cycle to ensure that you're well protected and within the framework. So with that said, we invite you to have an excellent day. And if there are questions along the way, you can get to any of us. We do have a poll also that you can, if you would fill that out, we'd be greatly appreciative. The topics that we provide access to on a global basis are based on the feedback that we receive from you. So if you have an opportunity to take a minute to just fill that out, we'd be very appreciative. Other than that, we invite you to continue to have an excellent summer. And if there are questions, we're happy to kind of answer those. Not sure if anything's in the chat currently, but really it looks like not. So I think we're good. So we invite you to have an excellent day. And thanks very much on behalf of Integro, Tech Data, and IBM for attending today. So thank you all. Appreciate it.